Now, another incredibly fascinating area when we talk about intelligence is creativity, and a lot of times we link these two together in many cases. Is that someone who is intelligent is also creative, and that may or may not be the case. You talk about somebody who is incredibly intelligent, like a mechanical engineer, and they are. And they show some measure of creativity within the confines of the area in which they operate. But the question is what is it? I mean, what exactly is creativity, and what fosters it, essentially? And so when we're talking about creativity itself, let me just define it real quickly. Is that what we're talking about here is something that someone who has the ability to produce ideas that are both novel and valuable. So two key components of this: novelty and value. So for most of us, a lot of us might have a fair amount of creativity. We can show novelty in our approaches to a variety of things, but whether it's valuable or not is another issue. And so creativity, there is a certain level of aptitude that is found on a consistent basis that supports creativity about above 120 or thereabouts. And I'll explain that a little bit more when we talk about intelligence tests themselves. But there's also two key components when we're talking about creativity. The first is a way of different kinds of thinking that is often found when we're talking about creativity. The first is convergent thinking. In other words, when I engage in convergent thinking, it's the idea here where I am driving to a single answer, essentially. So it converges into one single answer, and there's a certain amount of creativity needed, but it's convergent thinking. We arrive at the same answer. On the other hand, creativity tests require divergent thinking, and what that, as the name suggests, is I diverge from the primary way of thinking that would be convergent, and divergent thinkers think outside the box. That would probably be the easiest way to think about divergent thinking, is that I'm not contained, and this is how we use this phrase, I'm not really contained by the usual ways of thinking, and I come up with something outside the box, and that would be a divergent thinker. Some key things to keep in mind, I guess, when we're talking about creativity itself, is that there are 5 different components that have been identified as part of creativity. The first is expertise. There is no substitute for experience and developing a high level of expertise in some area. As a matter of fact, when you think about it, people that are creative are people who know their area so well that they explore kind of the outer boundaries of a particular area, whatever that might be. The second one is imaginative skills, to imagine, I'll just put imagination, to imagine different ways of looking at things, which brings about the divergent ways of thinking. 3, the venturesomeness, you might call it adventurous. They're willing to entertain possible ways of thinking that other people wouldn't necessarily entertain. I don't like to spell things wrong, so adventurous. 4 is intrinsic motivation. In other words, their motivation comes from within. They find value in doing something just for the sake of doing it at all. Oftentimes, the longer you're in school, the more you tend to be extrinsically motivated rather than intrinsically motivated. You don't do something just for the sake of doing it. You do something for the sake of the number of points you get, and that's an extrinsic motivation. Fifth is some kind of environment that encourages it or supports it. Environment matters. You have people who encourage you to think outside the box. You are going to be typically you're going to experiment more with it, and those are the 5 key components of creativity. If you want to be more creative and you want to be able to develop things, essentially you're going to have to develop expertise. It's interesting to note that people that end up having the most creative responses or come up with the most creative solutions are people who have been at it for a long time. I think the average is about 10 years at doing something over and over again to be able to, like I said, kind of explore the outer limits of creativity. And those are key components that are good to keep in mind when we're talking about creativity. Obviously, you have to have time for ideas to incubate. You have to have the freedom to let your mind roam a little bit, and certainly having exposure to other cultures and ways of thinking certainly help that.